Are you struggling getting your quilt projects done? Do you find yourself in your quilt room and not being able to accomplish much? Well, today I'm going to share with you some tips on how to increase your productivity. Basically, how to get more quilting done. So I've been using these tips, and these tips really do help me get more accomplished. So the first tip I have is one that I am constantly working on, and that is you need to have a clean and organized space, or any way I do. Now some people have told me that they can quilt in a mess. I can't quilt in a mess. I'm not creative in a mess. I just feel overwhelmed in a mess. So the number one tip for me is to just have a clean and organized space. Now I'm constantly working on trying to have a place for everything, and I haven't quite got there yet, but I'm working on it. But it really does help me. It helps to clear my mind, so my mind's not cluttered up when I start to sew. The second tip I have for you is to be sure your equipment is in good working order. For example, be sure that your machine is clean and has been oiled and has a new needle, so you're not having to stop and deal with that. Just a small thing as a dull needle can really affect your quilting and throw a monkey wrench in it when you're trying to get things done, because you may have to stop to try to figure out why your stitches aren't working or why your machine keeps malfunctioning. So be sure your equipment is in good working order. Be sure your iron's clean, your ironing board is clean, so that you're not having to try to take care of a stain from pressing and getting something on your fabric from your iron. So be sure all of your tools are in working order. Now another thing that could really help you is to be sure you have a fresh rotary blade. If you're going to be doing a lot of cutting, be sure that rotary blade is nice and sharp, because those are things that can cause frustration and derail your thought process when you're sewing. So the second tip is to be sure all of your equipment is in good working order. Now the third thing that I'm not the best at, but I do know it helps when I'm able to use it, and that is to have a plan or a little schedule of what you want to get accomplished. I do use a lot of lists, and they do help me be more productive. So if I know that I want to sew 3 blocks and I have an hour to do that, then I really feel like I'm more likely to get that done than if I don't have a list. Now, the fourth tip I have is to reduce distractions. For me, I need to reduce distractions for sure, because I get easily distracted. So I need to turn my phone off. I can't have the TV on when I'm sewing or listening to music. Now for some reason I can listen to a book on tape, but I can't listen to music. I get too distracted with that. One of my subscribers even said she put a do not disturb sign on her door and she locked it. Now I can't do that because my quilt room only has a doorway, it doesn't have a door, but maybe that's an option for you. But I do think that we do need to reduce the distractions. Another tip is, if you're going to do a lot of sewing, have those bobbins full. Now I didn't do this for a long time. I thought, well, I can stop and fill a bobbin. No, it really does help when all you have to do is put a new bobbin in your bobbin case. It really does help you save time, because while you're trying to sew, you're not having to rethread the machine. So tip number 6 is, if you are starting a new project and you are using a pattern, be sure you read all of the instructions first. It's kind of like reading the instruction manual when you get an iron or a new sewing machine. I know not a lot of people do that, but it really does help. And I really think that that's going to save you, so that you know ahead of time that you have everything you need and that you know what you need to do. Now, if you're starting a new project, be sure you make a test block. Now, some people chuckle at that, but it really does help, because sometimes patterns have errors in them, and you don't want to cut all your fabric and get ready to sew 12 blocks together when you don't have the right measurements. So be sure to make a test block. I do believe it will save you lots of time. Now, a subscriber left the tip in the comments that you can use like a collection of fabrics or a fabric line to make your test blocks. Then over the course of time you will have enough blocks to make a quilt with all coordinating fabrics, and I really like that tip. I have tried to start doing that. So I mean, you don't have to have a specific fabric line, but maybe you want it all red, white, and blue, but I think that's a great tip, because then you're not wasting the time you spend making a test block. And I will have to tell you a story. Years and years ago, when I first started quilting, my niece came to visit, and I pre-cut all of the pieces for her, and all she had to do was sew the quilt. Well, the instructions were wrong in the book, and we didn't have any more of that fabric, so they ended up having to drive to a town at least 60 miles away to get fabric to finish the quilt. So it is important to make those test blocks, and I know I'm not the only one that has happened to. The next tip is to work in batches. For example, if I've made my test block and I've read through the instructions of a pattern and I'm ready to start quilting, then I try to do things in batches. I try to get all of my cutting done. I try to get all of the pieces of a block sewn together so that I can just chain piece. So say a block requires 2-inch squares sewn together. I try to sew all those so that I can do that in a batch. I try to press in a batch. I wait till I have a little pile to press. And then when it's time to trim, I try to trim in batches so that I'm not jumping from one activity to another, moving from one station to another so often that I'm wasting time. Another thing that I think is important that I didn't discover for a long time, and that is to embrace your seam ripper. That is an assistive device that allows us to get those seams taken out quickly when we've made a mistake. And I spent a lot of time getting mad and frustrated, and really it was just a waste of time. Those are things that help us get our projects done, and really ripping out is really just part of quilting. Nobody's perfect, and at some point in time all of us have to use that seam ripper. Okay, so number 10 is, if you have tools that make getting the job done faster, don't forget to use them. Now, I'm not saying you have to buy things to sew faster. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that if you have the tools there, don't forget to use them. I like to use these little thread cutters for when I chain piece. I can just hold the fabric, each piece in one hand, and slip it over the little slots and cut them quickly. I don't have to get my scissors out and reposition the fabric and cut, then reposition the fabric and cut. I can simply use these quick little products, these little thread cutters, to help speed the process along. But sometimes I forget I have them and I don't use them, but those are important. And I don't know what it is about these, but when I use these, it is just a satisfying feeling. I don't know, there's just something so satisfying using this little thing to me. I know it's silly, but that's how it is. Now, you don't have to have specialty rulers to make beautiful quilts with, but if you do, use them. I really like the Flying Geese block lock rulers, and when I use them to make flying geese, it really does speed up the process, and these are so accurate that it trims them up as you go. So you don't have to have specialty tools, but if you do, be sure to use them. One of my favorite specialty rulers is the log cabin trim tool 2 ruler. I love this ruler. I made a log cabin quilt. Actually, I've made 2 log cabin quilts using that ruler. And again, it trims up the block as you go along, and it really speeds up the process. Now, I'm not going to make a log cabin tool without that unless it's a size that won't accommodate. So if you have specialty rulers or any type of specialty tool like the little thread cutters, be sure to use those. Another great way to speed up the process is if you have a foundation paper piecing, like if you have flying geese or half square triangles, use those to help speed up your process if you have a bunch of them to do. And that really does help you accomplish more in a less amount of time. Now, tip number 11 seems like a bit of a contradiction, because this tip is to slow down. Yes, you're wanting to save time, but I always find when I rush around and when I'm trying to hurry and get stuff done, that is when I seem to make a lot more mistakes. So be sure that you are taking your time to help reduce the amount of mistakes you make so that you're not increasing your frustration level and wasting time taking care of all those mistakes you've made because you're hurrying. So just slow down and enjoy the process. So if you have a tip that you'd like to share, be sure to include that in the comments below. I'm not the only one who reads those. Lots of my subscribers read those comments, and those comments are really helpful. I've used some of the comments, the suggestions and ideas put in those, and I know some of my viewers have too because they've commented on it. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't. Please share with a friend, and as always, leave a comment. I'd love to get those comments, and I try to respond to each and every one. So until next time, have fun quilting.